Welcome, everybody. I do want to acknowledge the land is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, which includes the Treaty 13, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, and home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I do also want to remember the 17-year-old Xavier Lawrence, who lived with his family at 31 Gilder Drive in Scarborough, attended a local high school, and neighbors and friends all speak to a great kid who loved music and basketball, who was unfortunately his life was cut short by a senseless act of gun violence. And our thoughts and prayers are with the family and loved ones of Xavier and the entire Gilder Drive community. We, as an organization, strongly urge anyone with information about this senseless attack to contact Toronto Police or Crime Stoppers. We also want to acknowledge that tomorrow is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It is a day to honor the children who never returned home and survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and communities. It's also Orange Shirt Day, which continues to be an important way for Canadians to honor residential school survivors. And we encourage everyone to wear orange tomorrow to show their support. I do want to speak a bit to some of the public session items that we'll be dealing with. As I said, we're going to try and prioritize the ones we need to address. I do want to also acknowledge that it's the TCHC's 20-year anniversary. Formed out of 3 predecessor companies. There are a number of events planned this year to celebrate the incredible achievements of the organization and acknowledge the long journey we've been on. We are hosting next week a roundtable on social housing with the International Housing Federation Conference. A number of local tenant events this fall to showcase the vibrancy of our communities, an essay contest for young tenants, and then we will share messages from current and former tenants, staff, and community partners on our social media channels telling the TCHC story. But mostly, I want to thank the employees past and present of TCHC during those 20 years for the dedication, hard work, and commitment to providing good homes and the services to our tenants. I do want to also, don't know, is Summer on? Yes, she is. So we wanted to introduce Summer Nadell, who is our, there she is, Acting Commissioner of Housing Equity. Just a brief introduction. She began at OCH at its inception as one of the early resolution officers, and before that was a family law mediator at Legal Aid Ontario. And before that, a director of Adult Day Health Care Center in Los Angeles. So why she moved here, I don't know. Left OCH in 2017 to focus on teaching, including in the social service worker program at Centennial. And then when Melanie Martin left OCH on maternity leave, she kindly returned to cover the role, and working with Cynthia quite closely, and stepped in as interim commissioner of housing equity for the balance of contract. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, pleased to have you. And now I see that the deputy mayor has joined us. So I want to say just a quick few words about the deputy mayor, who is, when I think of housing in Toronto, I think of Anna Bailão. She is, this is unfortunately her last board meeting, as she is not running again, which is, I guess, to her benefit, but the city's default. She's been a steadfast advocate since her first election in 2010 for preserving social housing, improving social conditions for our tenants, and creating partnerships to build more and new affordable housing. She was the driving force behind Putting People First report, which called for TCHC to preserve its single-family homes as social housing rather than selling them off to pay for repairs, a strategy that we're coming very close to completing, to getting federal and provincial governments to pay their fair share for the repair backlog, a success that we're seeing now, and frankly, a driver of many of the ideas that found their way into and drive the Tenants First Plan at City Council in 2016, which is the housing Bible we try to live by. But she's done everything in housing: chair of the city's Affordable Housing Committee, chair of the Planning and Housing Committee, city's housing advocate, and in all of those roles was a tireless advocate and a voice of reason in every one of those. So, and on behalf of your colleagues on the board and frankly everyone at TCHC, I'd like to offer our heartfelt appreciation and thanks to you for being a true champion of TCHC, its tenants, a true advocate for affordable housing in the city. You've done so much for housing in Toronto and for TCHC, and you've left it better place than it was when you arrived 12 years ago. We can't imagine how successful you will be afterwards, but we will miss you. So thank you from all of us.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to all of you. And to the staff at TCHC. It has been a real pleasure to work with the team and see this organization now with such strong leadership. You know, I'm sad to leave, of course. It's a mixed emotions, but it feels good to leave this organization.
Appears just before you go, you should improve the Wi-Fi at the city.
Yes, I know. I'm having that fun, but I can't do anything about it here now. I was just saying that, you know, we definitely came a long way. We stopped closing units and selling units to now having major investments in capital repairs, much needed. A very tenant-focused organization, and I'm proud of that. And that is a true testament for, you know, the people that have been at the boards and now the leadership. The TCHC is in good hands, and it plays a huge role in the well-being of the city. So I hope that everybody is proud of working for this organization with you know, sometimes the very tough challenges that are faced with us, which are very personal, right? Because you see sometimes human situations of the people that you're supposed to serve and are very difficult. So to all of you, thank you, and it's been a true pleasure to work with all of you.
Thank you. So we have our normal deputations. I think we've got 5, if I'm not mistaken, have been identified. We're going to be playing a bit with the agenda, and so we will try and make sure we get to them at the point where we're dealing with those issues on the agenda. So people have the agenda. You can see the matters that are listed there. So in that regard, any conflict of interests? Hearing none, I'm so pleased. I guess we first then, in terms of the agenda, people want to hold any particular items on the list. Wow, this might be fast. Okay. And a motion to approve the consent items then. I saw Nick blank. Brian.
We did have, sorry.
Deputation. So we got to hold some items for deputation. Sorry, 7D. And what was the other one?
8B, 8A and B, and 9A.
Okay, so sorry, they should be held. Other than that.
Could I ask for 7E, which is the capital budget?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay, so our list then, Dara, of held items.
I've got 7D, 7E, 8A and B, and 9A.
Okay. With those being held, I will amend the motion from Nick and Brian. All those in favor? Carried. Excellent. So I'm wondering, go ahead. I'm wondering we can do 7E first, maybe?
Alan, are you?
Do you want me to just ask my question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Alan, my concern was the fact that the contingency is fully utilized and we're only finishing up Q2. And that was concerning to me. So I wanted you to speak to that.
Certainly, through the chair. Thank you, Director Emery. So at the beginning, when the budget is set up, we do have a general contingency line item, as well as we do would have contingency within the various envelopes. So they may not be fully allocated, although we try to budget what we believe we're going to be spending by the envelope. There is some contingency within there. And then so that's where we would come to move funds around if we needed to move it from one envelope to the other. So at no time will we go over what our approved budget of the 350 is.
Okay, my understanding is usually contingencies are set that they're estimated to last you for the whole year in case there are issues, and you're only halfway through the year and your general contingency is now 0. And I just wonder if you are concerned that there'll be risk that you will either overspend or will have to defer projects.
No concern that we will overspend, noting that sometimes we do have to commit to budgets just depending on, and we have that ability to do with the carry forward. In terms of deferring projects, there aren't, we don't have concern with that from a perspective of there always will be projects that we will have to move around depending on emerging needs that come out with the portfolio. There may also be projects, for example, that we have to defer, if there wasn't a response to an RFP or something like that. So there are always some projects that we will have to move around to accommodate our emerging needs, but that's all part and parcel of what we do. We do review the capital budget. I can honestly say we review it on a weekly basis, down to the line item to see where we are, what we're forecasting for year end, and if we're running into any concerns that we feel need to be addressed. And then if there are any budget changes that we need to make as stated in bylaw number 3, then we would bring that forward with this type of report that we do on a quarterly basis.
So is there any, so Adele, I guess I'm just wondering whether there's any extra monitoring or something you want to bring to this just to.
Yeah, my concern is there's always surprises, and when you have 6 months left in the year to have no general contingency left, it is concerning to me.
Through the chair and Director Emery, there can be contingency though within an envelope, a budget envelope. So, for example, if there was a project within that envelope, there still can be contingency within that particular envelope versus the general contingency. So, for example,
I guess I don't have the quantum for that to understand what cushion or protection you have in case there's an issue that comes up in the next, the second half of the year.
You could take a look at it with the appendix. If we look at, just if I take commercial area accessibility CAO1 as an example, there's a budget of 11.75 million. And I'm not saying that this is exactly what might happen in this one, but we have a budget of 11.75 million in that envelope. Currently, we have a completion of 2.7 million and we're forecasting a year end of about 9 million. So that one has a contingency of, approximately 2.75 million in there in terms of budget to what we're forecasting. If there was a need to
Sorry, is that how you utilize the 9 million that's at the bottom to get you to from the 340 million to the 350 million?
correct?
Is that
Yes, Director Emery.
so you're treating? Okay, I find it very concerning, but I'll leave it there. And I hope there's a lot of rigor that goes into monitoring this.
But it sounds like we should, yeah. Sorry, I'm just wondering whether we should bring heightened attention to it, given your anxiety. And I think does it come regularly to your committee, Adele?
Not presented in this way, but we have asked for some other reports that are to come, but we don't see this as it is presented today on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Chair Murphy, if I can suggest that we are coming back later this year, I believe in the November timeframe, around capital prioritization. If we could add a component of contingency into that report to address this as well.
Okay. Yes, that is a report that BIFAC has previously asked for as it relates to how spending is prioritized.
Right. So I think, yeah.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So do we want to amend the approval to include a report back to BIFAC at its next meeting, or assume that's November, but I don't know. Okay.
Through you, Chair Murphy, once again, we're scheduled to bring a report on capital prioritization in November. If it's the will of the board, we could take it as direction to include a section on contingency in that report.
So yes, I think you should take it as being directed. So perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on?
Thanks, Alan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I've added to the recommendation that was originally in the report, an element to direct management to address issues of contingency in the capital prioritization report when presented to BIFAC.
That looks good to me, Adele.
I'm happy to move that.
Okay, seconder. Debbie, all in favor? Carried, perfect. What would you recommend we go to next, Dara?
I would suggest the next matter would be 7D. And
Okay.
I believe Ms. Wilkinson is on the line to make her deputation. Ms. Wilkinson, you have five minutes for your deputation.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to speak to you about this retrofit contract award for 828 Kingston Road. And the reason I chose to speak to this is because it's a significant undertaking in terms of time, staff resources, and finances to retrofit this 60-year-old building. It's likely, in fact, one of our bigger, capital projects. The vendor has indicated they can accommodate this project around other commitments, but there's no actual start date or end date provided. And I know that the tenants at 828 Kingston Road are not aware of this report, actually, and there's no indication if it will be sent to the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation board, so there's a bit of a disconnect. It affects them, but because it's capital, it's approved here. So to help the board familiarize themselves with this property, there's some additional information I wanted to share. The building is currently undergoing accessibility renovations on the main floor, interior and exterior common areas, which is about a 6-month project, and the tenants are looking forward to that. And the discussions that were had with tenants included additional capital items that would be done outside of the accessibility project, but perhaps not all of the items are known to them that are in this public report. I did not see any mention of a generator, so I'm not sure if the building has one or if the existing one would be replaced. So hopefully it's a seniors building, there is one. And there are also staffing issues at this building, which, you know, I realize is not Toronto Community Housing's responsibility, but, you know, the superintendent and site staff are responsible for 4 different buildings. So they're not always on site and available to these senior tenants. The building has also ongoing pest management issues, primarily bed bugs and cockroaches. A building treatment was scheduled but canceled due to COVID, and tenants were advised TCHC would not be proceeding. I believe it is a TCHC requirement and actually a commitment, if Richard Roach is around, that pest inspections will take place in every single unit prior to construction taking place. If pests are present, the unit needs to be treated until the pest issue is resolved. This is to protect not only our tenants, but also the contractors. When it comes to noise and dust, we all know the contractors will have protection. Our tenants will not. So some tenants consider maybe war veterans. They're going to be listening to extensive jackhammering, and this may trigger, you know, PTSD symptoms. It's quite common for Toronto Community Housing to close tenant access to recreation rooms during construction projects, and they do this to provide storage for the contractors or a lunchroom for the contractors. I am hopeful that in this instance, it will not be permitted to happen at this seniors building. The care and consideration must be at the forefront to manage the needs and expectations of these very vulnerable tenants, many of whom will have personal support workers that attend to help them either on a daily basis or a couple of times a week. And some seniors are homebodies, while others may need to escape the construction area, and having access to their recreation room will go a long way to minimize the noise and disruption during this 3-year project. When assessing tenant needs, it should also include temporarily relocating tenants at different points in time of the project to accommodate a disability, as I suggested earlier. And I understand there are staff in planned project services who are experienced at working with tenants through large capital projects. It's important that tenants have an on-site go-to person throughout the project so they can raise any concerns or fears they might have. So when you listen to your tenants, it's a win-win for all. This is a big undertaking. Thanks for taking it on, and I look forward to watching it progress. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Area and having access to their recreation room will go a long way.
Any comments or questions for Ms. Wilkinson?
If I may, Chair Murphy, I can
Yeah.
provide some context regarding this project and also answer some of Ms. Wilkinson's questions.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson, for the deputation. I definitely agree that this is a large undertaking that we're doing at the building. I can assure you that we have been in contact with seniors housing to make sure that they are aware of the project. The reason that we don't have a start and end date in the report is that we have to wait for the approval of the award, which is what's happening today at this meeting. And then once we have the approval, then we are able to engage with the contractor to get a specific schedule put together. So that does happen once the award is approved. We will meet with the contractor, get the contract signed, and then we begin the initial project, which kicks off with a pre-construction meeting that happens with site staff. We go through the schedule and everything like that to make sure that we share those details with the site staff. And we also review any specific needs that may be required at the building, such as what you mentioned. We do provide hearing protection as requested for tenants that may wish to have it. We do work on having a quiet room, and that can also be, we work with the site staff to see if it could be at a neighboring building where tenants could go, and we've done that on many projects in the past. And we will absolutely work with the site staff to make sure that we address any needs that are required by the tenants. So that's just something that you mentioned. Our plan projects services group, they work with that and work with the site staff to make sure that we can try to make sure the project goes as smoothly as possible. We completely recognize that it is intrusive work. It is needed work, I think, as we all know. We recognize it's intrusive, and we will work with the building and with the tenants to keep everyone as up to date as possible, and also accommodate any of the needs of the that tenants may have in the building. Thank you.
Okay, great. Do we need a motion for that? Yeah, hang on a second. Do we need a motion for that item?
We do. A motion to approve.
Okay. I have Adele seconded. Brian, all in favor? Carried. Great, thank you. Next, I think we had 8.
8A. Ms. Wilkinson, if you're ready to speak, you have the opportunity to depute at this time in relation to that matter.
I am. Thank you very much. And I forgot to forewarn you, it's fire alarm testing day in my building again. The good news is that we do it monthly, just as you have your board meeting. So just in case I get disrupted. So I wanted to just speak a bit about this update on the modern TO. And one of the most important things I want to share today is the importance of communicating decisions that impact on the way tenants interact with Toronto's community housing staff, wherever they may be, which includes 931 Yonge Street. And I'm doing this from an institutional perspective. We have a lot of new staff, a lot of new tenants, a lot of board members that may not be aware of things that happened in the history of Toronto community housing. So what I'd like to share is some observations and some suggestions. And a classic example is when corporate decided to change the names of the operating units across the city. So that is where tenants went to get services, and I think there was about 27 different locations. And they were called operating units, or the acronym was OUs. Then corporate changed the name again to community housing units, and they reduced the number significantly, like almost in half. So then those same offices tenants had to go to at new locations were called CHUs. Now, the TCHC portfolio is split into regions. So imagine the confusion for our tenants. Historically, when they changed the names of how the portfolio was managed, the tenants have never been officially informed of these changes, and they have no idea who they belong to. And it has caused them a lot of unnecessary grief. So once, management start using an acronym in their reports, it sticks, and then staff and everybody uses this abbreviation, but the tenants have absolutely no idea who they belong to when these kinds of changes happen. So, and it was stunning to me when I talked to tenants and they had no idea what OU they were in, and later they had no idea what CHU they were in, many thought they were still in. So most tenants today, quite frankly, have no idea that the portfolio is now split into regions, much less what region they're in. So as a result of those poor communications in the past, tenants continued to travel to offices that had long since been closed down or relocated, and that is just inexcusable, should never have happened. They travel all the way to the OU office to find it's closed, but they didn't know. So my reasons for sharing this is to remind you, based on this history, and the importance of informing tenants in advance of this move, but tell them what they need to know when they need to know it. So obviously now is too soon, but when the time comes, spell out exactly what tenant services, if any, tenants will be able to access at 55 John Street to reduce the need for tenants to travel there unnecessarily if the service they need can actually be provided locally. The governance committee, I know, recently discussed adopting the city's decision to hold hybrid meetings. So the physical location of board and committee meetings, be it 931 City Hall or wherever, at this time may not be a critical issue. And in terms of tenant engagement meetings, which took place almost nightly during the business week at 931 Yonge Street prior to COVID. There are many central located, accessible county housing buildings that tenants are familiar with, so they can easily transfer there for the tenant engagement activities. So thank you for hearing me, and hopefully you will take some of this to heart and implement it when the time comes to communicate it out. So thank you for putting tenants first.
Thank you. Any comments on that from any director? Thank you for your deputation. I guess we need a motion to receive.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Of course.
Does TCHC own 931?
Through the chair, if I may, Director Emery, yes, 931 is owned. And when we vacate 931 Yonge to move to Metro Hall, then the property will be turned over, or Create TO then will have control over the property, and are looking at the options for the future options for the property.
When you say control, it's being sold, or?
I know that they're looking at some redevelopment opportunities, and actually on the meeting, I believe we have Peter Heron from Create TO. I think he was here.
Thanks, Ellen.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't realize you had your camera on. I was looking for you. So we have Peter Heron from Create TO. So perhaps, Peter, you'd be able to just to speak a little bit more about it.
Sure. Thanks, Ellen. And through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the intention is that the property, or through the citywide real estate strategy, the property will, I think, come under the jurisdiction of Create TO to transact on this property. And we did bring a report forward to City Council in April with a proposed vision for this site, which would be to transact on this property for the creation of 1/3 affordable housing on this site as part of the new redevelopment of this property.
I was just wondering what the benefit would be to TCHC as the owner of the property. I didn't know if there would be condos or other opportunities for us to benefit from the redevelopment.
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, I think
Maybe too early.
I think the overall concept is again to try to transact on this property and prioritize the delivery of affordable housing as part of the redevelopment. But there may be further conversations about, I think, if any other value, how that's allocated within the city, if any is remaining after that.
Okay, any other? Okay, motion to receive. So, okay, Debbie and Aram, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
Next item is item 8B, and Ms. Wilkinson, if you wanted to depute in relation to that matter.
Great. Hello again. So I wanted to welcome Summer Udell as our interim commissioner of housing equity. I have full confidence in you to steer the ship. I wanted just to take a moment to remind the board of the Arrears collection pilot project, which was the audit conducted by OACH of tenant files that TCH had received an eviction order from the Landlord and Tenant Board. The purpose was to determine if vulnerable tenants had slipped through the arrears collections process, and indeed they did. 11 tenant households were wrongfully evicted. Now, TCHC did not actually serve the eviction notice to those tenants. They worked with OACH and they brokered a repayment agreement, and those tenants got to keep their housing. That's the good news. But it is through that process where we identified the vulnerable tenants for continuing to be evicted. It's important to note that some of those tenants were actually in the family portfolio. To reduce the risk of vulnerable tenants slipping through the cracks and, of course, the legal costs associated with that, TCH proposed a mandate change to have OACH audit all tenant arrears files prior to proceeding to the Landlord and Tenant Board. for an eviction order. The board agreed with this approach and approved the change in mandate. So on page 2, we'll see that there was the highest file referral in OACH history, and of those 753 referrals, 372, nearly one half of those files, were actually coming from the family households, and that should raise a red flag for us. Due to limited staff resources to manage this file volume, OACH had recommended that Toronto Community Housing revert back to prioritizing seniors and vulnerable tenants over family households. Now, the OACH mandate, as we know, it's not an open-ended arrangement between the two parties where Toronto Community Housing and OACH, can alter this mandate when the going gets tough. As OACH reports directly to the board, it is ultimately the board of directors who must agree to these proposed changes in the OACH mandate before they can be implemented. So while TCH staff were instructed to prioritize seniors, vulnerable tenants, or complex arrears files only, did they actually discriminate against these 372 family households that are in arrears? Did they advise them they no longer meet the criteria for the services of OACH? Where have we left these tenant files as a result of this decision? More conversation needs to be had with the board. And is this ultimately a fair and transparent process for tenants facing eviction? On page 20, the OACH recommendations with respect the arrears collection pilot program, as I referenced earlier, the TCH had wrongfully evicted 11 vulnerable tenant households. This is another red flag. This is an indicator that some of Toronto Community Housing staff still cannot identify a tenant that is a vulnerable tenant. So refresher training should be a priority on somebody's horizon to address that. With regards to the recommendation for TCH to host tenant workshops on the arrears collection process. In theory, it sounds like a good idea. The arrears collections process is the corporation's internal rent collection process, whereas the eviction prevention policy is the tenant-facing policy regarding evictions for non-payment of rent. I don't support the recommendation to provide workshops educating tenants on a process which we ultimately hope that they never have to use because they're going to pay the rent. So my suggestion actually would be for Toronto Community Housing to educate the tenants who need to know when they need to know it. In other words, when a tenant is actually facing arrears, that's when they need to know what the next steps are. So when issuing, many of you are familiar with this now, the N4, the Notice of Arrears to a tenant, includes some sort of a summary about the arrears collections process, and at that point they can familiarize themselves with the next steps. They are actually in that process. The communication, I always circle back to this, when we communicate with tenants, it must be tenant friendly. It must be personalized, and it must be in a softer tone. We must be encouraging tenants. We are here to help you. Let's talk about creating an affordable repayment plan that works for you. Just give us a call. And I really hope when we soften that kind of language, tenants actually feel encouraged and have the confidence to call the office and ask for help. So thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you were going to, you had some comments, but first of all, any directors have any questions or no? So Summer, why don't we turn it over to you? I don't know if you were gonna have comments, but
well, let me
sensible.
respond to through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Catherine. You raised a lot of very valid points. It's my expectation that although the priority in referring files to OACH is seniors, vulnerables, and complex issues, those files will be worked on by TCHC staff, the ones that are not referred to us immediately. And prior to proceeding to an L1, they will still need to come through OACH. So my hope is that there won't be any missed vulnerable folks due to the bottleneck that we've imposed. your recommendation about the workshops, I think that that's valid as well. And part of the new arrears collection process is that tenant services coordinators sit down with tenants, invite them to a meeting when they serve that N4. And so the education about the arrears collection process could happen at that meeting as well. And then it wouldn't necessarily upset folks that are not in arrears.
Anything in, do you want to speak to any of the rest of the biannual update, or is it?
That's up to you, Mr. Chair. I have a summary of the report. If you want me to go through it, I'm happy to do that. I don't know if time constraints is an issue.
I think it's worthy of you speaking a bit because you're, new in the position, and so I think
Sounds
it's a
good.
good opportunity for the board and the tens of viewing public to hear from you.
Wonderful. Okay. So this biannual report covers the period of time between January and June 2022, and comparisons were made to the previous 6-month period between July and December of 2021. This period represents the first period with the expanded mandate. Total referrals during this period were 753, and the early resolution officers worked with 577 of those files, and 372 of these files were from the family portfolio. We did notice a difference in the experience of case management in these files, and we intend to do further analysis on that. The managed arrears for this period represent $1.16 million. This is from accessing external funds, direct payments from tenants and their families, resolving losses of subsidy, processing annual reviews, and through repayment agreements. Arrears at the time of referral have decreased from 2,559 to 1,663. The month of referral to the OACH decreased from 17 months to 16 months. However, a further breakdown showed that files which were processed under the new arrears collection process made it to OACH on average of 4 months, and files which were processed under the old arrears collection process made it to OACH an average of 24 months. So this is a positive outcome of the new arrears collection process, and I'll say a bit more on that also. The audit findings were again presented in theme-based audit categories. I'll highlight a few findings from each category. Under recommendations related to administrative delays, issues with the N4 remain the same at 63%. This includes any error related to the N4. Referring to OACH within the timelines has improved from 58% to 21%, and utilizing the community services coordinators and doing so within the timelines improved from 67 to 16%. Under the recommendations related to non-compliance with policies or procedures, in this category, we're using a new lens to audit files which fall under the new arrears collection process. The new ACP requires TSCs, the tenant services coordinators, to make one fulsome attempt to discover the underlying issue causing the arrears and or to resolve the arrears prior to referring the file to the OACH. In 36 cases, which was 7%, we found that there were issues with this step. It's not clear from the documentation that this effort was made. This is an area we seek to study more closely as more files come to us under the new arrears collection process. As a comparison, the old ACP required staff to make 3 attempts to reach the tenant. If these attempts were documented, the file could be referred to the OACH. The change with the new ACP is the effort to first require staff to really attempt to resolve the arrears prior to sending us the file. Under quality of service, the most significant in this category is the recommendation to reach out to tenants' caseworkers. These are tenants who are in receipt of Ontario Works or the Ontario Disability Support Program. By getting their consent to speak to their worker, it will often result in resolving the arrears. And this recommendation was made 96 times. As far as the mandate expansion, the increase in referrals to the OACH in this period of time resulted in an increase in workload that became unmanageable. To offset this, we did begin sending files back for a variety of reasons. These included that the arrears were paid off between the time the referral was made and the early resolution officer's first contact with the tenant, that the tenant was already working well with their TSC, that the tenant was not living in the unit, or that the tenant was in the process of completing an in situ application. While this did not curb referrals enough, on June 6th, we did impose a bottleneck of 25 referrals from TCHC per week, and the EROs are still attempting to clear the files which were part of this backlog. While the new ACP has resulted in positive changes in some aspects of the eviction prevention strategy, as I talked about already, more is needed to ensure files are coming to OACH as a last resort. We compared the files received in this period under the old ACP and the new ACP and found improvements in all categories except for the fulsome attempt. We found that in 71% of cases, the files came to us on time, but no meaningful attempt to resolve the arrears was made first. In 36 instances, we found that direct contact did occur, but there was no documented follow-up with respect to resolving the arrears. Of note, mistakes related to the N4 improved by 45% under the new arrears collection process. We note that under the old ACP, 27% of the files had a repayment agreement brokered by TCHC prior to the referral to the OACH, and under the new ACP, only 5% had already entered into a repayment agreement. This speaks to the need to emphasize the fulsome attempt prior to the referral to the OACH. Based on these findings, we do make the following recommendations. Staff training on the OACH approach related to the one meaningful engagement with tenants. Amend the ACP to provide time for TCHC to resolve the arrears themselves. And support staff to identify arrears after the first missed payment and encourage staff to schedule meetings with tenants early and talk about the arrears collection process at that meeting. It's our expectation that these changes will shift the focus to the TSCs to resolve more arrears files and reduce the number of files that require OACH intervention, thereby allowing us to continue to review only those files prior to the L1 application and catch those people that really require our assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions for the acting commissioner? Brian, did I see you wave your hand, or was you just scratching your nose? So I would say the only, I mean, and you're probably well aware of this, I would say from our perspective, the one thing that we've been focused on for the function, because obviously you report to the board, is trying to maximize the degree to which you and your organization drives systematic change in the organization towards the successful outcomes, and focus on information that drives that, activities that drive that, as opposed to being, that's not to say you give up, but as opposed to being primarily focused on individual grievance or challenge settlement. So it sounds like that's what you're focused and driving towards. So that is good news.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I think we need a motion to receive.
That's correct.
So who's going to put up their hand? I saw Nick blink, and I saw Dell. Second, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. And thank you, Summer. Next one is
Item 9A, which is the
9A.
City Council directions requiring board attention. I believe, Ms. Wilkinson, you wanted to depute in relation to that matter?
I do. Thank you. And just to give everybody a heads up, it's my last deputation. They are testing my fire alarm. Hopefully I can get through this without that playing in the background. Okay, so, I really support this report that comes forward to the board. I can't thank communication staff, Paula Knight enough for doing it. And as indicated by management when they first presented this to the board, the items on the report will be highlighted as work ongoing until such time that the items are work completed, and they'd be updated in the next report presented to the board. This provides transparency to the board of directors and to the stakeholders that we're responding to those shareholder directions. I was surprised to see that 4 items with the status of work ongoing have been removed from the July report, keeping in mind the board did not meet in August. So at no time did to indicate that the work had been completed. Now, a couple of the items probably have been completed and a couple of the items probably have not. So one was taking action to protect tenants against extreme heat, where report is to go back to the Planning and Housing Committee on feasibility of requiring all apartment buildings to provide AC units. So that work is still in process, so that item should technically still be on this report because that report hasn't happened. Now, fixing gaps, service gaps in rent safe TO was the requirement for Toronto Community Housing to report back to the city on our pest management practices. They probably did that. So it probably is completed and could be removed. Followed by the strengthening tenant voices at the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation with respect to the health and wellness model. I understand that too may well have been resolved and could come off this report, but the board's not aware of it. The last item was related to the Dundas-Sherburne neighborhood revite update, which clearly is unfinished. And there's an expectation to report back to the Planning and Housing Committee, which is due in the 4th quarter of 2023. So I don't think that item is actually completed either, and I think it too should be reinstated on this report. So as a stakeholder, I'm following this report to see what's happening. So when items just disappear, I'm not sure what happened, and neither would anybody else, or much less the board of directors. So I'm just asking staff to look at this, revisit it, determine what should come off, and let's stick to the agreed upon process of marking work completed before items are removed from the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from any director? Is Paula around to? No, because Lindsay going to speak to. There we go.
I'm prepared to take questions, and I'll just respond quickly to Catherine's the item she's noted.
Can we mute her, please? Thanks.
There's her fire alarm. I'm glad it's working. I've taken note of those items that Catherine mentioned, and I am absolutely going to look into them, and we can provide an update on the status of those items at the next report. And I'll talk with the team to make sure that we are following the process that we laid out at the outset in terms of signing things off as completed before and coming to the board with those completions before we take them off the report.
Perfect. Thank you. Anyone else? Great. A motion to receive. Naram, seconded by Nick. All in favor, aye, carried.
That's the last agenda item.
I guess so, and it looks like we're I'm not sure Brian's
Right.
on, so we may be at the end of our agenda. So I would, there we are. Unless someone has any new business or anything particular, I think we can entertain a motion to adjourn. Debbie, seconded by Brian, all in favor. Thank you, everybody. See you after the election.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.